Welcome, my friends. It's David here, and I've been thinking that I'm just not getting enough rest or a good night's sleep. And I hear that from so many of you. So, what I've done is I've invited Saundras Dalton Smith, whose new book, Sacred Rest, will hopefully turn that around for all of us. So that's what we'll yak about today. What's up, everybody? David Yakir here for Yak About Today, hoping you are better, healthier, and more informed than any generation that came before. So if the years 46 to 64 mean something to you, then this is the place you want to be. Now put your headphones on, go for a run, and listen to what we yak about today. I've got Saundras Dalton Smith here with me, the author of Sacred Rest, How You Can Keep Your Energy, Happiness, Creativity, and Relationships Fresh and Thriving in the midst of never-ending family demands, career pressures, and the stress of everyday life. And boy, do I have questions. First and foremost, Sacred Rest. Now, it's interesting because as I look through this, first, I'm always taken about how people give meaning to words, like your rest actually stands for a few things. So why don't you tell us about the four things the R, the E, the S, and the T stand for?
Absolutely. For me, when I was going through the process of looking at how rest applies to my life and to that of my patients, I found that it was easier when I helped them be able to see how we could use it really to help them improve their health. So the R is really recognizing your risk for having a rest deficit, and one of the 7 types of rest that we'll be discussing. The E is for evaluating your current position so that you can see if this is an area that you are currently having negative aspects affecting your life, or if you're already excelling at that particular type of rest. The S is the science and the research. I spend a lot of time going through that so that people can understand that this isn't just kind of a mindfulness approach to rest, but there is scientific evidence that shows how these different types of rest and the lack thereof affects us. And then T is today's application. Within the book, for each of the 7 types of rest, I give specific things that you can do. Now, there's usually 3 or 4 that I will offer, because rest is not this one-size-fit-all thing. We all have our different personalities and our different likes and dislikes. So what we require to feel rested in the different areas can be different, but I like for people to have an application for that day.
You know, it's so interesting that when I think about rest, it's mostly about getting a good night's sleep, which honestly seems to be more difficult as we age. And in my discussions, I think you know that this is the show is dedicated to a 55-plus audience. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I hear often are that I just don't sleep that well at night. As I've gotten older, I'm waking up more. I don't feel like I've gotten rest. And I remember as a child that my grandparents were always up at 4 or 5 in the morning, sitting in their chairs, doing whatever they were doing. And my mother saying, well, old people don't really sleep. And but there's more to it in your book about what rest is. It's not only going to sleep at night and getting a full night's sleep, which I'd like to hear more about so I can implement anything you say, but it's also rest in general. And we think of that as rather simple type of things. But tell me, just in general, why so many people struggle with fatigue and insomnia. Is it all lack of sleep, or are there other things?
No, it's definitely not all lack of sleep. And I think that's evident in most people's lives, because even when they attempt to get more sleep, let's say they are successful at getting that 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever is appropriate for them, a lot of people still wake up feeling tired. And I think that's the part where a lot of people get confused, is that sleep is really just one tiny aspect of rest. It's important, but when we look at rest, if we're looking at just the physical type of rest, even physical rest is divided up into passive, which is sleeping and napping, and then active physical rest, which are those things that we do that restores circulation and the lymphatics flow and releases muscle tension, those type of physical activities that are still beneficial when we're looking at the whole concept of rest. So for most people, the problem is they never get into that high quality stage 3 and 4 non-REM sleep. When a lot of people fall asleep, they stay in stage 1 and 2, which is that very light sleep. So they're very easy to wake up. Activities and noises will wake them up quickly. However, when you get to stage 3 and stage 4, that's actually when the healing occurs. That's when people start feeling better. And if you don't get there, then you never really feel well rested. And to me, that's where rest comes in, because we can't go from our busy everyday lives and just kind of flick a switch and go into that deeper level of sleep. There's a process that has to happen.
So you're saying that there actually is a difference between sleep and rest, and that is those extra stages of sleep. Yeah.
So the difference between sleep and rest, sleep is just one component of physical rest. It's the passive aspect of physical rest. But then there's 7 other types of rest. You've got the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the social, the sensory, and the creative. So rest is way bigger than sleep. Sleep is just one little piece of one type of rest.
So during the day, when we say the word rest, it's sort of when I get up I do get up very early, 5:36, but I think that's mostly because of walking the dog. But I think of rest that about 10 o'clock in the morning, I need a little sort of 10-minute thing. I'll take a break from working and I'll just sit in my chair, lean back, rest for 10 minutes. And that's how I think of rest. But this seems to be slightly different. It's, you're not talking about, taking time, or maybe you are, maybe taking time in the middle of the day to really rest, but you're not thinking of like closing your eyes. You're saying there are so many other things, about feeling rested.
That's true. And I think one thing that a lot of people have trouble with is determining which of the 7 types of rest they are most in need of, which is actually having a negative impact or negatively affecting their life. That's why with most of my patients, I recommend that they use my free assessment at restquiz.com to actually find out what type of rest that they're most in need of. So what you're describing, kind of taking a few minutes to close your eyes and to rest, as you say, that is a specific type of rest. That's actually sensory rest, when you're depriving the senses for a short period of time. If you're going outside and you're appreciating kind of nature and those types of settings, that's a bit of creative rest. So you're already partaking of the different types of rest. You just haven't identified what types of rest you're using.
The two types of rest that I'm really interested in, or the ones that really stand out, I'm interested in all of them, obviously. But the 2 that stand out to me are emotional and sort of spiritual, because there's a lot of spirit. Your book really contains a lot about being spiritual here, and maybe in some cases it's about God and your relationship to God and things like that. So maybe you can take us through the differences on those 2, and then when we get back from break, we can talk about the others.
Absolutely. Spiritual rest for me is looking at that kind of greater than you experience, where it's not just this contained you and you alone in the world without seeing that there's more. And it really is more than religion. It's more about relationship with the holy, is how I term it. Because when we have that type of relationship where we feel that we are in a relationship with a holy power, with something larger than we are, we approach life in a way that's a little bit different than when we feel that we are isolated, that we're kind of in this bubble by ourselves and that there's nothing more. With emotional rest, that's one where you are allowing yourself to have authentic relationships with some people. Now, it's kind of fighting back against the the natural desire to perform and to kind of people please that tends to be a part of most professions. I'll just use myself as an example. I'm a physician, so in the ICU, there's a certain level of professionalism that's expected there. My normal personality is a little bit more of a jokester. I tend to be very goofy with my friends and have a lot of fun. However, that's not appropriate in the ICU. That would not come off very well. So I have to have a level of inauthenticity in order to be professional. But that can't carry over into every aspect of your life. There has to be those times when you can experience the emotional rest of being true and authentic to who you really are, and have those people that you can have that type of relationship with.
You hit something. We're going to go to break, but I wanted to say something. One of the discussions we've had on the show, and probably not something you and I are going to do here, at least not in this show, is talk about authenticity and when it's appropriate to be inauthentic. Because it's sort of really relative today, because many people are caught up in authenticity and think it's appropriate all the time that everybody should be authentic. And it's not, and you really identified a place where it's not. But we're going to take a break, and when we come back, your book has all these teaching stories in it, and I want you to pick out like your favorite stories. So we'll take a break now, and for our major sponsor, New Vision Eye Center, which everybody knows, I wouldn't trust my eyes to anyone else, and for commercial breaks. And when we come back, we'll be back with Saundras Dalton Smith. I want to take a moment to talk to you about New Vision Eye Center. For the last couple of years, they've been a sponsor of this show, and I couldn't be prouder. I've met so many people that have walked up to me and thanked me for recommending them. I hear all sorts of stories about how they've worked miracles. And as you know, I've been a patient of New Vision Eye Center for years. So when I say go see Dr. Minotti, Reinauer, Tate, and O'Brien, it's because I wouldn't trust my eyes to anyone else. All right. You're listening to Yak About Today. I'm David Yakir, and I'm here with Saundras Dalton Smith and talking about her new book, Sacred Rest. So before the break, Saundra, I asked you, and I'm really interested in this, and maybe you can tell us more than one, but you have all these teaching stories that you have in the book, and I guess we just want to hear at least one. So if you can pick out your favorite, that would be great.
I guess one of my favorites would be the one about Cynthia. She was someone that I met. We mentioned the ICU. She was someone that I met in the ICU for the first time. Obviously, names have been changed to protect the innocent. But for the most part, what ended up happening was she was someone who was living just a very high pressure, high achiever, high power life, and was not allowing herself time to rest because she felt like she didn't have time for it. She didn't feel like there was enough room in her day to do restful type things. And so on this particular day, when she hopped in her car to do her commute back home, she kind of lost train of thought. She was using that time that she was in the car to kind of zone out. And unfortunately, a lot of people do that. That is not a zone out time. You need to be reactive if you're in the car driving. And so as she was allowing that to be a zone out time, what ended up happening was someone slammed on the brakes and she couldn't respond in time. So she ended up in my ICU with tubes everywhere and liver lacerated and all these things happening, and ended up having to stay with us over the course of about 3 weeks to fully get recovered and to fully get renewed. And what I love about that story is what she said when she came out of that experience. She, none of us like to go through hard times or difficulty, but she admitted, I had gotten to the point where I refused to rest because I didn't see the value in it. And it ended up me having to take a 3-week a kind of like on-demand rest where you had no choice in the matter. But during that process, she started to evaluate her life and could see where the lack of rest was hurting her in so many different areas, in her relationships, even in her ability to look at her future and how she wanted to progress. Because her life had gotten into the cycle where everything was just the same as the day before. She wasn't taking time to reflect. She wasn't allowing herself to build any boundaries. So someone asked her to do something. She didn't evaluate it against her priorities and her boundaries. She just said yes, because she didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And what ended up happening is it landed her in a position where she had to take a hard look at her life.
This is a story, honestly, that everybody could relate to. The first part, and you really gave me a perspective on it I hadn't had before. And the story is that I was sitting at dinner, and I actually talked about something. I think I was heading to the radio station, and I left the house, and next thing I knew, I was at the radio station. Right? I had zoned out. I mean, it's one of those things, and we laughed about it at the time. And everybody said, I do that all the time. I'll go to the market or I'll go to work, and all of a sudden I'm there, and I always wonder, how was I driving? And I never had that perspective like that. We were being forced to use that time as rest time, and that's what it is. I have to tell you, that's all new to me, and I think my listeners are really going to be, it's going to explain a lot. But anyway, I just wanted to put that in. One of the situations that arises, and I think it arose actually with the baby boomer generation, is we had to put all our heart and soul into work to earn the living, to raise the family, to, take responsibility and accountability for everything, in our lives. And there was really, I guess, no time to rest, and we excused it because this is the way we had to deal. But you're saying, honestly, that there are long-term effects on focusing only on work, and sort of omitting that rest. And, I'm not sure what you do about it.
Well, we're having to relearn kind of some of these things that we have accepted to be the normal. Just for example, one type of rest is social rest. There's a huge population of people who, have gone through difficulties with their marriages and relationships, where they say things like, I feel like we've grown apart from each other. I don't know who you are anymore. When we talk about social rest, we're talking about the rest we find when we're in the presence of another person. And I don't mean in the presence as in sitting in the same room with each other watching TV. I'm referring to the presence that comes when you're knee to knee, you're staring in each other's eyes, you're holding hands, you're experiencing just the energy of being around someone. There's a rest that happens when you're around someone who makes you happy, who is life-giving to you. And so I think it's important that we understand who those people are, and to kind of differentiate that out from the people who are draining us on a day-to-day basis. And when we look at work, oftentimes we're working with people that are draining us, because we're in a position where there's an expectation of us. But there usually is some people who are life-giving even in that situation. And so if we focus on making a point of not sending a text or an email to that colleague who we have a good relationship with, actually getting out of our chair and going to their office and spending just 5 minutes in real conversation back and forth, even if it's conversation about work, we will feel more energized and less detached than we do now.
I have a question about that, actually. I find, many times when I'm carrying on a conversation, and this may not be relevant to your topic, but it did make me think of something, so I thought I'd see if there's any thoughts you have on it. I notice that people will talk and stare at each other, but they don't listen. They're too much in their head,
yes,
thinking about their next thoughts as opposed to the other person's thoughts and thinking and what they're trying to communicate. And I always think that, well, now that you put it in my head, when I do it, I always think of that as rest time, like I'm zoning out, instead of really communicating. And I'm not sure how you control what you're talking about, like really communicating and enjoying the relationship that you're having at that moment with that person, as opposed to zoning out and resting at that time.
Well, I think what happens for a lot of people, there are opportunities because we don't make this a priority, are opportunities for that emotional rest, of being able to share authentically and to tell our truth, and that social rest of being in someone's presence. When we have those moments are so few and far between now with social media and all the electronic ways we communicate. When we have those real conversations with people, it's almost like we're sitting at the buffet and we're starving. So rather than be able to actually taste all of the bits of the conversation, we're so hungry to kind of get our portion, to get our emotional rest, to get our opportunity to share. But what happens is the more that you do this and the more you make it a priority, then you'll find that I don't have to be greedy with the conversation. I can go into listen mode and not feel like I'm going to miss my opportunity to express myself.
All right, and there's another question, and this one relates to sort of work, and I'll tell you what's bringing it on. So my experience, I worked for one of the huge corporate entities in the advertising and technology world, and the moment I would walk into the office, the environment was such that I had to succeed. I had to prove myself. It was go, go, go. I mean, if you weren't moving or weren't delivering at every moment, the expectation was that you would, because if you didn't, you would be evaluated a certain way as not contributing enough. And that's an environment that, you deal with because you have to. But it may be an unhealthy environment. And so in your book, you really talk about the work environment and the effect it can have on rest. So can we talk about that?
Yes, and that's actually what I spend a lot of my time now doing when I'm outside of my office. I'm working with corporations to help them see how improving the way that their employees look at rest as within their normal day-to-day activity, how it actually improves the overall productivity, employee retention rate, as well as decreases their return on investments with their insurance companies and the money that they put out in illness and in time off from work. Because what happens is when we create these cultures where the type A personalities and the Enneagrams type threes are set up to excel, we do kind of create this go, 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 keep pushing, don't stop, don't take a break. But what happens is we don't realize that what that does is it causes those high achievers to become drained. And so we see a lot of high achievers who start having problems with depression or start having unnecessary issues with headaches and insomnia and body aches and body pains and all of these kind of non-specific health issues. And that's when they show up in my office, when they have all these non-specifics and they're like, something's just not right. I can't concentrate anymore. I can't come up with new ideas. And all of that is a result of not resting well, not understanding their need for rest.
Saundra, we're going to have to take a break now and wrap it up for our broadcast audience. But if you'll stay with me, we'll come back so the rest of the world can listen to you on the podcast. This is David Yakir. I'm here with Saundras Dalton Smith and her book, Sacred Rest. I recommend that you pick this up if indeed you're having trouble sleeping, resting, and want to have a better understanding of it. I'm David Yakir, and love you. Peace next week. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's David Yakir here. I'm here with Saundras Dalton Smith, and this is our podcast continuation of the broadcast interview with her. She's the author of Sacred Rest, and I'm hoping that our broadcast audience tuned into yakabouttoday.com or any of the iTunes or podcasting networks, and of course on Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus, and probably any place that you can do social media on. Anyway, we're continuing with the interview. And so, okay, so here it is. I want to continue for those of you who were listening to the first part. I want to continue about during the day, the work environment. In that day when we're under all this pressure, I don't understand how to rest besides sort of going into the utility closet and closing my eyes so nobody sees me, or dozing off during lunch. So maybe you can give us sort of examples when we're sitting at our desk, or even honestly, and that's just one way. I mean, a lot of us have our other halves are at home dealing with children and everything else that goes with it, and these days soccer games and school and clubs and all that. So both sides of like a family need the ability to sort of rest during the day in those two environments.
Absolutely. Look, what I'll do, I'll just go through the 7 types of rest and maybe give 1 or 2 tips on ways you can incorporate that particular type of rest within a busy day. Let's look at physical rest to begin with. If you're at the office, physical rest mainly is going to be best utilized in what we call body fluidity. So most people spend their time at an office in some type of stationary position, whether it's at a desk or standing at an assembly line or something like that. So if you're, for instance, at a desk, then body fluidity would be making sure that you're not staying in that seated position for longer than 90 to 120 minutes, or an hour and a half to 2 hours. And during that time, what you would do is you would just stand up. That's a great opportunity to go and get a bottle of water from somewhere, since half of the country is dehydrated chronically, to actually purposely either set a kind of a timer or a chime or some type of reminder to not allow your body to stay in a static position. The other thing that helps with is most of the time when people who have problems with physical stress, they hold their stress within their shoulders or their necks or their legs. When they get off and work at the end of the day, they have a lot of tension headache and muscle spasms and neck tension. If you evaluate that every 90 minutes to 2 hours, what ends up happening is you can quickly assess, oh, I'm clenching my teeth. I'm stressed. I'm clenching my teeth. I feel pain in my TMJ joints. You can start doing some very simple self-massages to release those muscles so that they don't continue to just get worse and worse. Another example would be, let's say, mental rest. If you're someone who has a tendency to ruminate over information, something bad happens, something upsets you, or conversation didn't go the way you want, so you're playing the woulda, shoulda, couldas in your head about what you wish you'd said and didn't say, or you're kind of, even if it's at nighttime, for instance, and you're someone who lays down and these thoughts just kind of keep coming to your head and about your to-do list or what you're supposed to do. One simple technique is what we call mind dumping. Just having either a notebook, a journal, a piece of paper, a Post-it note. Doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be some way to concretely pull that ruminating thought or whatever that is that keeps running around your mind, to be able to write it out. Because the way the mind works is, as long as you keep replaying it, it thinks it's important. And so it doesn't want to let David down by just, letting it go. So when you write it down, it's like permission to say, okay, I've got it in a concrete location. It doesn't have to stay in my cerebral space. And it allows you to clear some of that cerebral chatter. As far as the, let's say, sensory aspect of it, if you're in the office, you mentioned before, just kind of closing your eyes. You can even, as long as you're not driving, you can even do that right now. Close your eyes and you can just see how closing the eyes actually relaxes the muscles in the face. That's something that's very simple to do while you're sitting at the desk during one of your breaks that you set up, just to allow yourself a few moments to let your body kind of unwind and relax, and to give that just momentary sensory deprivation from the computer screens or the bright lights, whatever may be attacking your senses at the moment. As far as creative rest, there's a lot of studies that have been out that show that people have a response to green and to blues. It's the reason why so many people say that they feel calm when they're at the ocean. The greens and the blues, when they looked at MRIs of these patients, it actually showed that the brain has a chemical change that occurs when looking at some of these natural colors. So we can do that same type of creative rest appreciation, which is really the appreciation of beauty and its ability to awaken awe and wonder in us. We can create that same thing with beautiful artwork and beautiful pictures and beautiful imagery. So I recommend all of my patients to go out and actually find something that is meaningful and beautiful to them that they can put into their office. And it doesn't have to appeal to anyone else, because it's not their creative rest you're trying to improve. It's your personal creative rest.
It's so interesting you say that. It reminds me of the time, and sometimes it's unfortunate, when you walk through a museum and you sit down and you look at pictures, and all of a sudden your body sort of just relaxes in that environment. Unfortunately, sometimes you can doze off, but there is a relaxation that takes place when you walk into environments like that. And I hadn't thought about that in your everyday life, putting something in front of you that would help you relax. But I have another question. So, and this one I thought was funny when I first started to look at it. In your book, you say, you mention sort of giving gifts of rest. And in my mind, I'm sitting there going, hey, you look tired, take a Valium. Here's a Valium, go take a nap or something like that. But you have another version, obviously, of giving giving the gift of rest.
Yes, for me, the gifts of rest are those things you get out of your time of rest. So they're things like boundaries. People who accept that they need rest, they get the gift of boundaries because it forces you to start creating personal boundaries. They get the gift of reflection because they start taking a look at their life about what is and isn't working. They get the gift of communication, like we talked about. They have an ability to listen better and to be able to be better communicators because they're no longer feeling the need to kind of overforce their will of getting their conversation portion, and they're able to take a breath and listen to others. So, and there's many others I think there's 12 total that I put in the book, but lots of opportunities to grow. And one of my favorite is the gift of productivity, because as I mentioned, what I'm finding with a lot of companies is that when I go in and I teach this to their employees and we have these sessions, what ends up happening is they come out of it with an understanding of how to stay even in the most stressful jobs and not feel overwhelmed, because it's that feeling of overwhelmed that makes us want to quit. And it's that feeling of overwhelmed that makes us not see the really the benefit of what we do within our jobs. When we are able to actually take a kind of a step back and you don't feel like your job is overwhelming you, but that you have some level of control over your day, it makes a huge difference in your ability to produce.
Okay, I know you have to go, but I do have two more questions. So
okay.
If you'll just stay with us for these. Tell us the REST quiz. Tell us about the REST quiz, because I want everybody to take this.
Yes, my patients always say, I'm tired and you give me a 70-question quiz. It's like, it's comprehensive. So it's not difficult. It takes less than 5 to 10 minutes is what I say. I can do it in 5 minutes, but if you really contemplate the questions, you could pull it out to, I guess, 10. But honestly, they're supposed to be quick answers. You read the question and you give your honest, quick response. Don't overanalyze it. It should be able to be done in less than 5 minutes, to be honest with you. And then what happens is at the end, I spit out a result that shows you where you rank in all of the 7 types of rest, so that you can quickly see, oh, I excel at physical rest, but I'm needing some work in social rest or sensory rest. And what I find is most people have at least 2 where they are really off on. And those 2 that they have the biggest deficits are usually the ones that are having the most negative effect in their life. And most of the time they're not even aware of it, because what I find is things like creative rest, sensory rest, social, and even emotional to some degree, those 4 types of rest are so new to people that they don't even know they need it until they recognize it's something they can have.
That's interesting, because I think the quiz would give you the ability and knowledge to sort of plan, to rest. I guess, I wouldn't say schedule it, but more or less plan, a 24-hour period of how you're going to rest using, all the information in the book.
Yes, and for most people do not have a 24-hour period they can rest. That's I wish they did. That would be awesome. What I'm finding is most people are having to learn how to live a restful lifestyle, how to take small chunks of their busy day and allow little bits of rest spread throughout the day, so that it's kind of a lifestyle more than it is just kind of a weekly sabbatical or something.
Okay, last question, and it's sort of a similar question that I ask all my guests. it's sort of a last thing you have to say to my audience. And a lot of the audience sits there and throws away rest and goes, I have no time for it. It's a luxury, that type of thing. Give me that final thought for people who really think it's something they can't afford to do, or, they can only do sort of like as a vacation.
Absolutely. That's the thing. Vacations are never restful. Most people who say they're going on vacation, they come back and they complain that they really don't feel like it helped. If you're someone who's taken a vacation and felt like it only left you more tired, or if you're someone who goes to sleep at night and you're waking up in the morning and you feel like you didn't even go to sleep, your days are continuously staying in this chronic fatigue, I don't recommend that you go pop a new pill to try to sleep better, because all of that's artificial rest. What you're wanting is true rest, the ability to be able to let your body be restored. And that's what rest is. It's an opportunity for restoration in those areas of your life that you daily pour out of.
Oh, I can't thank you enough for being here, Saundra. I hope you'll come back again. I really love the topics. I'd love to talk more about it. That's Saundras Dalton Smith and her new book, Sacred Rest. Everybody go out and buy this book. It will benefit us all. So this is David Yakir. You're listening to Yak About Today. Love you. Peace. Out.
Take out